Well, this is the news that MAGA and Donald Trump have been dreading, because in the aftermath of President Biden's State of the Union address, Biden and Democrats have gotten a litany of good news with one poll after another and fundraising. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, hopefully I don't jinx it, but we just got to talk about how there's been some genuinely good news for President Biden and the Democrats. And I don't know about you, but as a cynic by nature, I need to hear some good news. And I'm sure many of you do as well. I'm going to direct you to a tweet from Simon Rosenberg, one of my favorite political commentators, a Democratic strategist who, I won't say rose to prominence, but was, because he was previously prominent, he used to work for President Clinton, I believe, during Bill Clinton's first election effort, and then he surged back into prominence and has become increasingly higher profile because he was one of the few who correctly interpreted the data in advance of the November 2022 midterms and said, guys, there's not going to be a red wave. Rosenberg was vindicated, which doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be right about what he says about the 2024 election, I must say. But again, he was right. He went against the grain. His interpretation was correct. And he has been a purveyor of good news with respect to the president. And he says now there are 6 polls with leads for President Biden after the State of the Union. 44 to 43, Economist YouGov, which was today. 47-45, FAU Main Street, 44 to 43. And again, the second numbers are all for Trump. 44 Biden, 43 Trump for the Morning Consult. 46-45 Public Policy Research, 50 to 48 Ipsos/Reuters, 45 to 44 Civics, and now the Economist poll average has Biden up 1%. Obviously, that's within the margin of error, but as Rosenberg concludes, it's now wrong to say that Trump leads. Enjoy. Again, within the margin of error, this may change tomorrow, but right now, Joe Biden is back in the lead against Donald Trump, and that's great news for Joe Biden. But it doesn't just stop at polling. And I'll say this again with respect to polling. I know it upsets a lot of members of my audience. But again, this channel will never, ever, ever ignore polls. We try to contextualize them. We try not to freak out about them because they're simply a snapshot in time. So simply because a poll says something now doesn't mean that it's going to be true by the time of the election, good or bad. But I know a lot of people want us to throw polls out altogether. We're not going to do that. Even Simon Rosenberg doesn't do that. But it doesn't just stop at polling, the good news. Fundraising. Where President Biden and the Democrats have just been kicking MAGA's butt consistently, quarter after quarter after quarter, and even Fox News is talking about it.
The Biden-Harris campaign did announce over the weekend it raised more than $53 million in February and has $155 million in cash on hand. That's an amount they say is the highest total from a Democratic candidate in the history at this point in this cycle.
That's great news. That is phenomenal news. I mean, fundraising doesn't guarantee election results, but it certainly increases your chances. It doesn't hurt to have more money than the other guy. And by the way, the vast majority are from small donors, and Donald Trump has been struggling with that. I'll also say before I play this next clip, in which a Democratic strategist talks a bit more about President Biden's fundraising, the chyron you'll notice on the Fox Propaganda Network had to do with President Biden, questions about President Biden's mental fitness. I will remind you, because not nearly enough people talk about this, poll after poll after poll shows that a majority of Americans also have doubts about Donald Trump's mental fitness. Right-wing media will want to tell you that this is a perception problem exclusive to Joe Biden. It is not, and that's why President Biden's Twitter page, as well as Democratic communications, have been relentlessly hammering Donald Trump on this issue because they know he is also quite vulnerable, and they should continue to do so. And play this other clip again, which further is elucidated about the fundraising and what it might mean ahead of the election.
Those two money figures that you showed, that's a structural advantage right now for this White House. We read over the weekend stories of really the Trump campaign scurrying to try to desperately raise money, knowing they're getting farther and farther behind, as donors worry more and more about whether their contributions are going to a campaign or to pay Trump's legal bills. But look, I also read that longer story. I think the tension that is being talked about in that story is a good tension. I think the president wanting to be out there talking to voters, campaigning every day. I think that's the kind of excitement Democrats want to feel from the White House and the campaign and from the president.
So we'll get into the last part of what this gentleman is saying in terms of tension, because it's worth talking about. But again, just note this excerpt. 53 million for President Biden in February. Democrats overall have 155 million, and Republicans only have 40 million on hand. It's colossal disparity, folks. It's colossal, right? Biden made more in February than Republicans have on hand, period. Hopefully this trend continues because it will be enormously beneficial. Now, with respect to what the gentleman said there at the end, there was reporting from Axios that President Biden is becoming more anxious and concerned about the outcome of the November 2024 election. And I know some people read that and are like, oh, this isn't good. I say it is good. I actually agree with that gentleman there, because if you recall, in previous videos, I've been frustrated, and I know others have as well, with almost the Zen-like confidence that President Biden and Democrats have seemingly evinced about their ability to beat Trump. And if you recall, I've said in debates, discussions, my own videos, that I want President Biden to be confident, because if he's not confident, he shouldn't be running. He should pass the torch to somebody who is confident that they can beat Trump. But if he is confident, he shouldn't be arrogant. I don't want him to pretend that it's guaranteed that he's going to win. The way I've described it is, I want Biden to stand resolute and smile, but I want to see a bead of sweat running down his temple. I want him to be a little bit concerned. And I think it's good that we're hearing about this, because it means he's not unaware of the challenges that he and his party face, and that they're not obtuse, believing that there's no way Donald Trump and the Republicans can eke out a win. That, to me, is good, that you have somebody in a fight, metaphorically speaking, who understands that he may lose the fight. And that means he's probably less likely to make mistakes if he understands that there's a risk involved. So I love to hear it. Which brings us back again to Simon Rosenberg. We begin with Simon Rosenberg. We end with Simon Rosenberg. This is what he had recently to say on MSNBC in terms of an overall assessment of the Biden campaign.
Yeah, look, I think the big thing to me that's happened in the last few weeks is that the central arguments that the Republicans have been making against Biden have all evaporated. The economy is strong. It's not weak. Inflation isn't rising. It's down, right? Crime isn't surging across the country. It's plummeting. There isn't a war on energy. We saw more domestic oil and renewables produced last year than any year in American history. And in some of the other attacks on the border, right? We're now the party that wants order on the border. They're the one that wants chaos.
And you may recall, because we've discussed this, that recent polling suggests that swing voters are furious with the GOP about their cynical scuttling of the bipartisan border bill. As swing voters are beginning to recognize that it is, in fact, Republicans' fault, not Democrats. Now, again, you can't just take that for granted. Democrats need to keep up the pressure, keep spreading the facts. They can't just assume, oh, that momentum will carry. They need to maximize it. They need to continue it. I think Simon Rosenberg has an overall compelling case. The facts and the record are on the Democrats' side. Perception is where we still have a fight on our hands. We have to take those facts and persuasively convey them to the American people. But again, so far, really good news for President Biden and the Democrats in recent days, and hopefully that momentum will carry. Let me know what you think in the comments.